Welcome back to Asia Tonight. Our top story is the Hong Kong protests and China's reaction to the escalation there. Beijing issued a stark warning to Hong Kong protesters today not to underestimate the immense strength of the central government and not to mistake China's restraint as weakness.
And joining us from Hong Kong is Andrew Shuen, Research Director at the Lion Rocket Institute. Andrew, strong words from Beijing at this news conference. What statement stood out the most to you?
I think all of them didn't really stand out to me in collectively, because it is basically a rehash of what they stated previously. But they did, after the previous press conference, which was unprecedented, they released a few videos of the People Liberation Army practicing crowd control techniques, dress rehearsals. So, but the protesters in Hong Kong through social media has already stated that if they do send in the People Liberation Army, that they will be going back to bed to have a nap and to see how long they will be out of the barracks for. And once they return to the barracks, they'll be out again.
Now, they gave a warning to Hong Kong protesters not to underestimate the power of the central government. Do you see this as an ultimatum, perhaps, to protesters before it takes any action?
Well, one of the biggest problems in governing Hong Kong is the complete free flow of information, and even the protesters' tactics nowadays is a direct copy of Maoist guerrilla tactics. So the Hong Kong local term is to be water, which is to flow from the police or whatever force is being applied by the government into other areas where there are no presence. So that is why you saw 21 police stations attacked yesterday. They weren't done simultaneously, but whenever the protesters through social media detected that a police station had low manpower, they'll flow that way. So yes, the central government can issue all these warnings, but ultimately it comes down to a political solution, which I think the government, at least up to this point still, won't offer, because they don't want to encourage even more protests, thinking that yes, the protest don't want to encourage the protesters to think that such violent actions can yield any results.
But, Beijing has hinted at punishment for these protesters. Do you have any idea what that might actually involve, though?
Well, the press conference, you have to remember, was held at the highest level of the Beijing government. So whatever they say can and obviously will be interpreted as state policy. The simple use of punishment could range from, abducting individuals in the worst case, or what I think and what is actually being done is through the Hong Kong court system, which all sides right now are still find it to be extremely credible. So if a judge were to hand down a sentence, say over rioting, the individuals involved can still go for appeal, and even if the appeal fails, the people of Hong Kong so far believes that at least justice can still be chased through the courts. And of all the press conferences held by the People's Republic of China, all levels of government, whether it's the Hong Kong government or the central government, there is one press conference that I think has been neglected by a lot of media, both in Hong Kong and abroad, which was the press conference held by the Macau government yesterday, in which their chief executive announced that they are going to withdraw the suggestion from the Macau legislature, the idea of setting up a sovereign wealth fund, an investment company funded and controlled by the government, because within the Macau community there is lots of controversy over whether the fund is going to invest into One Belt, One Road projects that would ultimately fail to yield any returns. And the chief executive of Macau actually said that as a responsible government, without thorough consultation, we believe that any legislative action meeting such controversy should be withdrawn. So it has proven, because the same office that advises or communicates or liaises with the Macau government also liaises with the Hong Kong government. So even more Hong Kong people now believes that the way that the Carrie Lam, our chief executive, has been handling the entire issue is so now different to the Macau government that this is not something that Beijing is instructing her to do so. So there are now logical suspicion that Beijing's feeling towards Carrie Lam is actually much icier than what they publicly proclaim.
So what does that mean for her then? I mean, they have publicly, though, kept their support with Carrie Lam. If indeed you're saying it may not be as strong as perhaps we think, will that stoke further protests?
Well, the thing is, if you see today's in Hong Kong, apart from a few hundred sets of traffic lights which had its wires cut yesterday, there was absolutely no sign of the disturbances from yesterday. The tear gas has been blown away. The petrol bombs has been extinguished. And there was actually no physical traces apart from one police van that was torched of the riots last night. So it was the damages done from yesterday was actually less than a typical typhoon blowing through Hong Kong. And if the People's Liberation Army, I mean, the Beijing government is still an extremely rational government. And yes, to them, having their logo or their national symbol defaced with paint and a flag tossed into the sea, they do say that it is a big deal. But it is not big enough deal to send in, say, tens of thousands of soldiers into Hong Kong yet. Yes, I suspect that there could be more violent protests. And yes, the People's Liberation Army could be sent in. But ultimately, this is still a political question, because unless they completely shut off Hong Kong's telecom networks and bring out blockers of Bluetooth signals, the social media networks in Hong Kong will still be able to operate and guide these protesters from places to places. So I don't know. This is absolutely a new wave. The police is still using 20th century crowd control tactics. I mean, they never actually, the training never actually included calculating that every individual have a smartphone on them. So I think not only the Hong Kong police is learning lots of lessons from crowd control from Hong Kong's disturbance. I think law enforcement around the world is actually looking at Hong Kong's cases and say, if protesters were to evade from one intersection into the next one simply because they know that tear gas is not being fired there, then how do you actually respond? Because up to Sunday, 1,000 rounds of tear gas was fired, but yesterday alone there was 800 rounds of tear gas fired in Hong Kong, and yet this disturbance still lasted for 8 hours. So it still ultimately comes down to a political solution, but that won't come until the disturbances or the rioting stops. A lot of people.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut you off right there, but thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We certainly are in uncharted territory with Hong Kong, and many lessons to learn as well.